Welcome back to 33-year-old Boomer, ranting in the snowy woods. Kids are tech illiterate now. Let's talk about it. So when I was a young lad, when I was a wee lad, our parents would always say, "Oh my god, dude, these kids are so good with computers, like I can't even believe it, dude. Whoa, did you see how they installed that printer, dude? Oh my god, these kids are like so good with computers, I can't even believe it." Now, because of course the boomers and a lot of Gen Xers don't really know much about computers, that seems very impressive. But the reality is that knowing how to operate an UI does not make you intelligent. Knowing which bubblegum buttons to press on the UI, on the smartphone, on the iPhone, does not mean that you understand anything about the underlying principles of how the technology functions. And this is what I want to talk about today. You see, companies have done their best over the years to abstract problems away in terms of software. Like, they've abstracted away how the software works. If you have an iPhone, if you have any phone really, although especially an iPhone, you don't deal with files on your device. You deal with some abstract concept. So if I take a photo on my phone, you don't go into your files and you access the photo that way. You access it through the photo app. It's just a photo, bro. It's not a JPEG, it's not a PNG, it's not a highly compressed format. It's just a photo. You don't have to worry about what it is. God's forbid you want to actually copy some files over to your machine. Now that's when it gets really complicated. Computers can't just copy files to each other, don't you know? You see, when I was in school, I was talking to my IT professor, and one of my colleagues said, "Windows is so stupid, like any dummy could use it." And my professor said, "Exactly, that's how it's designed, that's the point. Because the more dummies that can use it, the more money Microsoft makes." Which is a very valid point, and it's a very clever idea from the perspective of making as much money as humanly possible. However, from the perspective of people being able to function, that's not so good. Because even with PCs and Macs and even with Linux, things are getting abstracted in that direction. Things are becoming easier and easier to utilize, at least in theory. It's all breaking down, of course. Nothing works properly anymore. But the idea is that if you want to make money, if you want your software to sell, even if you want your Linux distro to be downloaded by as many people as possible, especially as the normies flood in, you want to make your distro, you want to make your operating system, you want to make your software as easy, as normie friendly as possible to use. And by doing this, we now arrive at a situation where Apple made that ad about the iPad, where I think someone asked some kid, "Hey, what kind of computer is that?" They're on a laptop, they're on an iPad, and the kid goes, "What's a computer?" Oh my god. That's obviously the direction that they want to take this in. And that's not good. Because you see, like back in the day, secretaries knew more about computers than like most kids now, most Gen Z. Like back in the day, let's say in the 80s and the 90s, secretaries had to learn how to use Unix. They had to work with the command line, and thus they got good at it. UIs weren't really a thing yet. And so they had to know what a file is, they had to know what different file types are, they had to know various Unix commands, they had to know how to do like tables and Vim and all sorts of stuff like that. And so, like, women who are now retired, essentially, knew more about computers than, like, because they were secretaries, they knew more about computers than Gen Z does. Gen Z doesn't know what it's just a photo, it's just an abstract concept to them, it's just a video file, it's just a game. They don't think about the underlying technology. And this is a problem, because the more you abstract this stuff away, the less control you have over the machine. You see, I like the terminal. I love my terminal. It's fantastic. I am trying to move everything inside a terminal. For example, I love Obsidian. I use it all the time, but I've been moving everything into the terminal, and so I can still use Obsidian when I need to. I still have it open. It's still connected to my vault, to my database. But I want to do most of the work in the terminal because it's just such a joy to do, and I have so much more control over what is happening. Now, this requires a bit of a learning curve, of course, but ultimately this gives me a bunch of control that I simply do not have if I just use the UI. And even the terminal, like, they're trying to hide that. Like, why would you need, what are you, hacking? Why would you ever need to use a terminal, bro? What are you up to? Just click on the bubbly UI, it's fine. Look, we've put all this effort into making this beautiful UI, these beautiful bubblegum, chewy, lovely buttons. Just click on them, bro. Why would you want to look at an ugly screen with like some white or green text? What are you, some kind of Luddite? Now, I'm a bit torn on the topic because I have a suspicion that this isn't entirely a bad thing. Because I suspect, like, especially with Linux right now being flooded with normies, I suspect that this will simply lead to more technical people being created. If you had some kid who had the misfortune of growing up with Windows or Mac OS and never even considering opening a terminal or ever even considered trying Linux, if not for the prices right now of RAM, and I've made a couple of videos on this topic about how RAM prices might actually be a good thing, high RAM prices. What's actually happening right now is companies like Lenovo, and I believe Dell as well, are considering going back to 8 gigs of RAM as standard. Which is a problem if you want to run Windows 11. When your operating system eats up like 6 gigs of RAM by default, if you dare have like a browser open and maybe WhatsApp, which takes up 1 gig of RAM, by the way, if you dare have these things open, your computer is now grinding to a halt. You're now getting the blue screen of death because you have 4 tabs open in Bing or whatever, in Edge, and because you also have like WhatsApp running. Goodbye playing video games on anything like that, right? Unless you run Linux on it, of course. In which case you'll realize that, oh, my new this Penguin operating system only consumes like 0.5 gig of RAM. Maybe 1 gig, depending on how, what you're doing. That's crazy. What? That's possible? You can just use 0.5 gig of RAM and have the rest available for video games? I can just go on Steam and I can buy a bunch of games on sale and I can just play them? That's crazy. That's crazy talk. Like, once people realize this, once a lot of like teenagers basically realize this, once they can no longer play anything on their computer because their parents can't afford to buy them a computer with 16 gigs of RAM, once they realize this, they'll just switch over to Linux. And they might get a very user-friendly distros first. But then at some point they're going to go, how do I change this setting? How do I do that? Can I do that? Because Windows doesn't let me do that. Can I do that in Linux? Oh, I can. Oh, I have to open this thing called the terminal. Oh, that looks kind of scary though. Am I gonna like hack some servers by accident or something? Am I gonna hack the planet? No, I'm just gonna type in a few commands and just change the default behavior of my operating system. Oh. And that's when it happens. That's when some mild curiosity, or even an annoyance, right, wanting to change some setting, that's when that changes over into passion, or at least the seeds of that are planted, because now you realize that there is this whole world beyond just clicking buttons and moving windows around. There is this world of applications that are designed specifically to do one thing and do it very, very well. You could, if you're an unfortunate soul, you could try to use Windows search or whatever it's called, find, or whatever it's called. You type in the name of a file that you know you have on your machine, and it can't find it, but it bings. It doesn't Google. It bings stuff for you. You're looking at the file. It's on your desktop. You're typing in its name, and your computer can't find it, and it suggests that you go on the internet and use Bing. Spotlight is better on macOS, but my dude, you could just use find, and especially if you're looking for text, anything that's text-based, you can search within the files. It's so much better. It's so much better. It's a relatively simple application, in the sense of it's simple to use, and it just works. It doesn't have a UI. It's fast. It just does the thing that you want it to do, and it does it well, and that's all it does. It doesn't do advanced maths for you. It doesn't it just finds files, and it's just called find. Once people get a taste of this, or at least once the autists get a taste of this, because most people are not going to be this person that I'm talking about. Most people are going to just remain within the Microsoft or Apple ecosystem. I'm still within the Apple ecosystem somewhat. I use an iPhone. I have a MacBook, although I'm moving over to Linux, and I'm keeping the video editing stuff on my MacBook, and then everything else on my ThinkPad. But most people are simply going to remain entrenched. They're going to keep getting more and more annoyed with Windows and with Mac. Things that they used to do 10 years ago will no longer be available to them. I'm sure that at some point Windows is also going to abstract files to some degree, where they're going to force you to use some photo app that they have. And it will be more and more difficult to just copy files over to a different machine. And this won't be for any technical reason. You'll still be able to do it. In fact, if anything, they will make your operating system, they will make your computer slower in order to make sure that the computer doesn't do that. Because of course, a computer can do anything that any other computer can do. And if you want to set up a system where you cannot access your files properly, you have to do it within the confines of some application. In order to do this, you have to put in more work. You have to think of all the ways in which the pesky, annoying user might try to do something with a file that you don't like, that they might try and copy a file from their computer to their phone. And so you actively have to go out of your way to design your operating system in such a way that the user is not allowed to do that. Even to this day, like if I connect my iPhone to my MacBook, I can now transfer some stuff, But like, you'd imagine that I could be able to go on my computer, plug in my phone via cable, and then browse my photos and my videos from the Photos app and just copy them over to my machine. I can't do that. It doesn't let me. It doesn't even show me the photos. But if I download a third-party camera app and I take photos and videos with that, then it will allow me to do that. But then if I copy the files over, the status bar gets buggy. This is macOS in 2026, by the way. The status bar gets buggy. And so if I want to copy 7 video files to my computer from my phone, the status bar shows for the first app, for the first video, but then not for the other 6. So I have to wait some indeterminate amount of time for the other files to move over. And if these were small video files, it's not a problem. But if you have like 70 gigs worth of files you want to transfer over to your computer, because I film in 4K, right? The first video file transfers over, I get the visual feedback, and then I just have to wait for the other 6 to finish. And there's no visual feedback for me to be able to know when that's going to happen. If I use AirDrop to send the files over, which I often do, the visual indicator is also buggy. Because what happens is I get a little notification at the top right, and it shows an icon of whatever, like my user icon avatar, and then like a little circle, like slowly goes around the avatar, and that indicates the status of the transfer. And so in theory, that would be accurate, no? Because they know precisely how large the files are. The operating system knows precisely, this is turning into a macOS rant, they know precisely how the speed at which I'm transferring files over, and yet it can't accurately portray that. If you're sending something small, it goes whoop and bam, it's done, right? But if you want to send, I don't know, 50 gigs worth of files over to your, because you just vlogged and you want to send over the files to your machine to edit them, it will start to move, but then it will stop like halfway through. And the first time this happens, you go, did it just fail halfway through? It says successful, and then you check and it finished. It finished, but it's incapable of accurately telling you that of calculating where the percentage should be. And so it actually finished, but it gave you the impression that it was only halfway through. This is macOS. This is macOS in the current year. How is this a bug? Did they not test this for large files? Did they just test it for like 200 megs worth of JPEGs? I guess. Like, bro, I can film 4K on this phone. Why did you not test that feature? That is crazy. I can use local send as well, although I find that can be a little bit slower sometimes. I'm not sure why. I have to do a bit more testing, although I love local send. Those of you who don't know, local send is an open source application that you can use to send files between machines on the same network. So if you're at home and you have your phone connected to your Wi-Fi and you have your laptop on your Wi-Fi and it's the same Wi-Fi network, you can wirelessly send photos and videos and any files that you want across different machines. And this is cross-platform. So you can have a Linux machine and an iPhone and it still works. You can have, like, it works on everything. It's fantastic. You see, this is what happens when you get all this abstraction, when the companies think that they know better than you do. What you get is a system that doesn't quite work properly. And you might say, well, this is better for like the normie users because they don't know what they're doing. It just affects us autists. But that's not true, because the normies also hate these operating systems because nothing works anymore. Everything is so abstracted. And every few years they change how everything works. So the normies now have to relearn how to do things that they were able to do 10 years ago with no problem. And now a more powerful machine with a newer version of Windows cannot do the things that Windows could easily do 10, 15 years ago. where they move the things around in the settings. These are just people who need to justify their jobs, and so they make life worse for millions of people just to justify having their job. And people are baffled to find that they get they have an old computer that's let's say it's 5 years old, and with each new update, Windows gets slower, their machine gets slower, and they think, oh, it's just an old machine, it's starting to wear down, that's why it's slow. No. As I've said before, the reason why your computer is slow isn't because it's old, it's because the software is new. Isn't that insane? With each new update, you get more abstraction, the software gets worse, the experience gets worse, and your computer gets slower. And so you have no choice but to buy a new machine if you want to keep using Windows or Mac OS. Except that, of course, machines are getting more expensive now because of the cost of RAM and SSD. And so you're in a situation where even if you buy a new machine, it's still not going to be any faster. Unless you want to spend like 3 to 4 times what you should be paying for a new machine, then it might get a bit faster. Isn't it funny how Microsoft just put itself in this position where they're the ones that kind of started all the investment in AI with OpenAI? They're pouring all this money into buying up hardware for their AI infrastructure. And the result of this is that they now can't sell enough machines with Copilot because you have to have at least 16 gigs of RAM to have a machine with running Copilot. But if manufacturers are defaulting back to 8 gig machines, 8 gigs of RAM, because people can't buy the 16 gig machines, you now have a situation where Windows is forcing you to upgrade, but you can't because you can't afford it. So you're forced to stick with Windows 11, maybe even switch to Linux. And no one's going to buy their 16 gig machines because they can't afford them. It's almost like Microsoft is its own biggest competitor. Crazy stuff. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.